Hello and welcome to Peston on Sunday. Coming up, we've got the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, the Greens leader Caroline Lucas, Labour's attack dog Barry Gardiner, a movie star who's totally hacked off with the Prime Minister, Hugh Grant, and chewing on my croissants and the red meat of the campaign, we've got Labour's Jess Phillips and old-school Tory Nicholas Soames. Watcha. So, it was a week we learned all about them. Well, supposedly. He launched the most left-wing Labour manifesto in more than 30 years, but somehow forgot to promise to unfreeze benefit payments, to reverse the government austerity cut that's currently widening the gap between rich and poor more than anything else. She, too, launched the most left-wing Tory manifesto probably ever and claimed that her party abhors social division, injustice, unfairness and inequality, but again said nothing about making benefit payments to low-income workers more generous. Only he pledged to spend billions on thawing the big benefits freeze, but he didn't make much of it because all he seemed to care about was giving us a vote to keep us in the European Union. As for him, his big idea is that all women should be called Natalie. Well, I suppose that's another form of egalitarianism. So, of course, I'm Natalie. Are you, Anushka, Screeny?
We are all Natalie now. Well, apart from Theresa, who is waking up to some pretty difficult headlines this morning. Look at the Mail on Sunday. They are borrowing the language of Jeremy Corbyn, calling that social care policy a dementia tax. Now, some Tory MPs are unhappy about it, and they have been talking to the Sunday Times that leads on the backlash to that policy, saying that it has tightened the polls. They call it a Tory wobble, and they have one Tory minister saying Theresa May is getting carried away with the idea of a landslide, although she insists that is not the case. She says if she loses just 6 seats, then Jeremy Corbyn will be taking charge of Brexit. Now, Labour are talking about the numbers too. Some say that Jeremy Corbyn will have been successful if he improves on Ed Miliband's 30% share of the vote. The shadow Brexit secretary, Keir Starmer, disagrees. He told my paper, The Guardian, that would not be good enough, that it's all about seats. Now, this chart shows you both those things. It shows you the number of seats Labour won at each election, and that white line there shows you their vote share. They tend to track together, but not always, and significantly, not here. In 2015, Labour's vote share went up, but it lost seats and the Tories won a majority. Now, if that Sunday Times poll is to be believed, this white line would go up again for Labour, but it would lose more seats and the Tories would secure a majority of 46. Robert.
So I'm delighted to be joined by two of Parliament's most flamboyant personalities, Labour's Jess Phillips and the Tories' Nicholas Soames. And I was delighted to see you out this week, Nicholas, campaigning in what we might call the traditional way.
Well, I've got a large part of my constituency which is a real rural area. And by far the best way to contact people is from a horse.
And they can probably hear you coming, clip-clopping down the road. Do they run away and hide? Or
they both.
Now, look, I want to talk to you about where we are in the campaign. Nicholas, obviously, the tax, or I should rephrase that, the new approach that the Prime Minister unveiled to social care, where everybody has to pay towards it up to your last £100,000. A lot of people don't like this. When I talk to MPs, they say it is being raised a lot on the doorstep. Older people in particular are very anxious about what this means for their savings and their ability to pass on property, for example, to their children. How worried are you that this is damaging your core vote?
Well, first of all, everyone knows we can't allow it to go on as it is.
The social care system?
The social care system. Secondly, there is not a member of Parliament in the land who doesn't spend a great deal of time having to deal with problems related to social care and the affordability of it. Thirdly...
I mean, in your constituency, I mean, a lot of people will have properties worth considerably more than
they
that.
will. But the other point is, Robert, that there are going to be 2 million more people over the next 10 years who are going to be over 75 years old. It doesn't exist. The option to do nothing doesn't exist. And
but is this the right policy for you?
This is the right policy, but I think it's a start. And there is a long way to go to get it right. And, of course, people are going to be anxious about it because it's quite a fundamental change. But it's not one that can be left. And I think the Prime Minister is quite right to deal with it.
So just to be clear, if there's a long way to go to get it right, you obviously don't think this is the solution.
No, I think that the whole social care funding structure in this country is very complicated and difficult and is going to need a great deal of care and attention over the next 10 years, of which this is a significant step forward.
Is £100,000 the right level to set, in a sense, the element that you can keep?
Well, I think it's the right level because I think you have to have a cut-off point which is seen to be fair and reasonable. And I would just make one other point.
And you think that is fair and reasonable?
I think it is, but I don't have an old person who comes to see me who doesn't worry about the young people and whether or not they're going to get fair shares. And I think older people do know that they have been very well treated, actually, by and large, and it is time that we had a regard.
Is this benefiting Labour, this policy, do you think?
I think it probably will do, yeah.
Is it being raised when you're out campaigning?
Yeah,
are people mentioning it to you?
I'm hearing it on the doorsteps already. A 95-year-old veteran said to me yesterday, and this, funnily enough, it won't even affect him. He lives in a council house, so it's not like he has property to lose, but he said he feels that the government, and he felt it before, but this is the nail in the coffin, that they want him dead, that they feel that he's a burden.
So it's about respect for older people,
yeah,
that
older people are a burden and they're sort of being blamed for getting old. So that is definitely coming up. The thing that keeps coming up as well is the disparity between if you get cancer and if you get dementia.
And that's certainly something that people mention to me all the time, that people feel that it's somehow unfair that you get free healthcare treatment.
This is not a refined system.
If it's anything apart from dementia.
No, this is not a refined system. We're going to have to work out the details, but it is a step forward, and the option to do nothing doesn't exist. And there is a real problem on intergenerational fairness in this country, where young people really are beginning to get the rough end of the stick.
Except that the Conservatives could pay young people.
I've got to cut you off because Boris is apparently looking at my notes, so I've got to go over and talk to him. More from Jess and Nick later.
What a rotter.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by the Foreign Secretary, who's not playing by the rules. Great. Anyway, lovely to see you. Nicholas Soames, your esteemed colleague, says that what you've announced, or what the Prime Minister has announced on social care, is the beginning of a process of sorting out. Do you think that's right, or is this... Because it doesn't sound as though he's terribly happy with the policy.
No, I think what Sir Nicholas said was absolutely right, which is this is necessary. We face another 2 million people over the age of 75 in the next 10 years. We have to do something about the huge costs of social care. And I think it's a mark of Theresa May's bravery and candour with the electorate that she is doing this. And
your poll ratings are falling, according to the two latest polls.
It shows
are you worried about
the strength and purpose that she will bring to everything she does if we are re-elected, and in particular, of course, to the Brexit negotiations. And I think there is a fundamental contrast in this election between the two candidates who can conceivably be Prime Minister.
Now,
the relevant contrast is, who do you trust? Who do you really want to confide in to handle those all-important Brexit negotiations?
Yeah, but on the question of trust, people want an honest answer on this social care thing. Now, having read through my notes, you'll know what's coming next, which is, was the Cabinet consulted on this policy before it was put in the manifesto?
I think this is the right policy.
No, you're not answering.
And I'm supporting...
Plainly, you weren't asked your opinion on it.
There's all sorts of consultations about the manifesto in advance. You wouldn't expect me to go into detail. But we need to do something.
I think we might expect it.
No, you certainly wouldn't. But we need to do something to tackle the cost of social care. And the crucial thing that, as Nicholas said, people are going to be able to whatever happens, people are going to be able to live in their own home. They'll have that anxiety taken away. They'll be able to live in their own home, and they will be able to pass on a minimum of £100,000 to their kids. Now, this is a policy.
Sure.
This is a policy that has been supported across the spectrum. I saw Polly Toynbee, my old friend Polly Toynbee, saying she thought it was the right way forward. It was brave and right and a progressive thing to do. And I really think that the way that Theresa May has handled this is a mark of her character and of her resolve and the determination that she brings to government.
Can I ask you...
And that is exactly,
Sure.
just to get back to my central point, that is exactly what we need now.
But
we are at a critical phase in the history of this country. We have to get Brexit right. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for Britain, as I've argued with you before, Robert, but it has to be done right. And I am genuinely alarmed by the idea that it could be handled in just 11 days after the election by Jeremy Corbyn. This is a guy who doesn't know...
Boris, but we are going to come back to Brexit, so don't have any anxiety about that. But we need, because this is the most controversial and the most eye-catching policy in the manifesto. I've just got to ask you another couple of questions about it. One is this point, which is raised a lot with me, that it is unfair that you have to pay... but what could turn out to be a vast amount of your own savings if you suffer from dementia, but if you have some other kind of illness like cancer, the state picks up the bill. Do you recognise why people feel that's
Robert,
unfair?
I do understand people's reservations and people's the questions that people are asking about some of the detail of this. But the broad thrust is right. And as Prime Minister said, there will be a consultation on getting it right. But the broad thrust has got to be brave, to be resolute, and to take on the problem. And I think most people will think it reasonable that we've quadrupled the amount that you can pass on to your kids from about £23,000 to £100,000, and nobody will face the terror of being forced to sell their home while they're alive. And I think that is a very important step forward.
Just finally, before we move off this subject, this issue of whether the Prime Minister, indeed the Tory party, is, in a sense, devaluing everything that older people have done in their lives by, ending the triple lock,
absolutely not,
means testing.
You're talking to the man. You're talking to the man who not only who extended free travel in London to 24 hours a day.
But you understand the anxiety that Jess Phillips raised from one of her constituents.
And it is massively valued. It's something that is very progressive, that keeps older people in work. We support it completely. What we're trying to do is to address what I think everybody, all serious demographers acknowledge, will be a massive problem of the costs of social care in the long term. This is responsible, grown-up, conservative approach, trying to deal with a long-term problem in a way that is equitable, allows people to pass on a very substantial sum still to their kids, and takes away the fear of having your home sold.
And now on the other big issue, I think, for many people of the campaign, which is immigration, are you very disappointed that you lost the argument with the Prime Minister on abandoning that tens of thousands target?
Let's be absolutely clear about immigration, Robert. As I say, there are two candidates at this election. One of them, Jeremy Corbyn, is in favour of higher immigration and complete free movement, he said in January. And, I do not for the life of me understand how he is supposed to go and sit at that table in Brussels on day one of the talks, when he hasn't got a clue whether he wants to stay in the single market or the customs union. He doesn't know whether he wants to be in or out of either of them. And he has a completely unintelligible position on immigration. I think they're going to look at him and they're going to have him for breakfast. And I think it would be deeply damaging to the interests of this country.
Whether they do or not, do you personally believe the target of tens of thousands for net migration is a sensible target?
Look, I certainly think that you need to get immigration down.
To tens of thousands.
And I think you need to have a sensible target, and I think tens of thousands is a perfectly sensible target.
And you don't think it'll damage the British economy?
There is no way at all.
You don't think that would damage the British economy?
There is no way at all that you can control immigration, if you have the approach of Corbyn and the Labour Party, and you say it simply doesn't matter anymore.
When will immigration into this country be tens of thousands?
When we're able to take back control.
Well, so in 2019, it's going to fall to tens of thousands?
I'm not going to make any predictions of when we're going to achieve it. But what I can tell you is that unless you have Theresa May able to deliver on that agenda and able to push through what the British people actually voted for on June the 23rd last year and take back control of our immigration system, you haven't got a prayer of achieving it. And because Jeremy Corbyn is ideologically opposed to the whole shebang.
We haven't got long before the break, so one quick one on this, and then we'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. But you on this programme were very clear that you didn't want student numbers in the emigration figures. Again, this is not really your manifesto, is it? You must be really disappointed that the students are still there.
I'm pro. I think London is a great, and this country is a fantastic magnet for talent and for students, and that will continue. But I just
you're not worried that students will be deterred by the fact that you're driving immigration down to tens of thousands, which may imply to them that they're not welcome here.
No, this is an economy that is hugely attractive to people from around the world, and we should take that as a compliment to the UK. But it is perfectly reasonable to have control, and that is what we want. And you can't achieve that if you go into these negotiations without the foggiest idea about what you want to achieve. And I'm afraid Jeremy Corbyn clearly wants not only to raise immigration, as he said, but he doesn't know whether he wants to be in the single market
because
or out
we've
of
got more from Boris after the break. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. I'm delighted, I'm slightly surprised, the Foreign Secretary is still here. Anushka.
Thanks, Robert. Well, as you can imagine, we are getting lots of reaction on Twitter to Boris Johnson's interview. Let me show you what Rob Hutton from Bloomberg has said about it. Johnson is the Tories' living dead cat. A dead cat is something you throw on the table at election times to distract people. Rob continues, if their poll lead falls anymore, they'll stick him on another zip wire for the rest of the campaign. Please bring it on. And let's see what we've got here from Norman Smith at the BBC. He points out that the Foreign Secretary has said social care policy is supported across the spectrum. Starter for 10. Can you name a charity or pensioner group who back it? We will come back to that. But first, being Foreign Secretary means building foreign relationships, and few are more important than our relationship with the US, which may explain why our guest has changed his mind on Donald Trump. He once said he was clearly out of his mind. He now thinks he has an exciting agenda for change. But can Boris Johnson be trumped out? Let's see, using our very own Trumpometer. This measures the president's emotions via his tweets. So starting on the lower ground floors here, he is calling the former FBI Director James Comey. He's saying he'll be replaced by someone who will do a far better job. Let's say that is Donald Trump positively calm. Up we go, and we get him quite peeved, trolling Iran on Twitter, saying they don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them, not me. And up to the gold-plated penthouse, Donald Trump thinks allegations against him amount to the single greatest witch hunt of a politician in American history. So, Foreign Secretary, where would you be stepping off the lift?
So, I'm delighted that Boris, as I say, is still with me. Single greatest witch hunt of a politician in American history?
Donald Trump has his own approach, doesn't he? And he's bringing something new to... I don't think anybody expected a president of the United States to have, to keep tweeting in the way that he is. But I think a lot of people find it quite refreshing, quite interesting, because these are the round, unvarnished, unpasteurised, unhomogenised views of Donald Trump. And I think I'm not allowed to do it. I'd love to keep tweeting the whole time.
Lot of talk in America that he will be impeached. Have you sort of looked at the protocol of how we behave in those circumstances when the impeachment process is going on? I mean, who would our loyalty be to it? Would it be to the president? Would it be to the legislature? Complicated stuff.
It is, but you'll remember we went through this with Bill Clinton, who was impeached, if you recall, for his shenanigans with Monica Lewinsky and so on. And it was very clear what the interests of the UK were then. You're about to have Hugh Grant on your show, who memorably made a speech, I think, in some film about how the British Prime Minister is perfectly at liberty to say something is completely in distinction from the President of the United States. We often disagree, but the fundamentals of our relationship are extremely strong.
But how would we maintain the relationship in those circumstances?
Well, there are all sorts of... the relationship with the President and between the President and Theresa May would continue.
Would continue in the normal kind of way, even if he were going to impeachment.
Hoping that Theresa was re-elected. But at all sorts of levels, it is incredibly dense and intricate relationship.
Do you think he will serve a full term?
On intelligence sharing.
Do you think he will serve a full term?
Look, that's really for the American people and for the American system. But I think my strong impression is that there's all sorts of plaster falling off the ceiling as a result of the style of his government. But actually, when you look at you saw he tweeted about Iran there, and everybody's worried, well, had been very worried about the US approach on Iran. Actually, thanks at least partly to British diplomacy, the Americans now support the nuclear deal with Iran, where they're not moving away from that. They haven't moved their embassy to Jerusalem. And in Syria, which I was mentioning to you just before the break, it's very interesting that during the break, they are doing things that Obama never did, which actually a lot of people, liberals around the world, and particularly in the Middle East, are
we haven't got a lot of time, Boris, so I want to bring you back to the meat. I want to bring you back to the meat of the election. Andrew Roberts today attacks the Tory manifesto for betraying the values of Baldwin, Churchill, all the great Tory prime ministers.
You've got
in the
his
past.
grandson heckling you there. You couldn't have a more effective and instant repudiation.
You're not worried that all this
repudiation of that point.
You're not worried
out of the horse's mouth, I might say.
So just to be clear, all this stress on narrowing the gap between rich and poor, tackling inequality, this is stuff you're fully signed up to.
One nation Toryism understands the basic symmetry of an economy and of politics, which is you've got to have a strong economy and a dynamic, wealth-creating sector, Robert, to pay for the things we care for.
We're almost out of time. I've got to ask you two.
And we're putting £8 billion more engaged, and we've got a long-term plan
You'll love this because it
care.
goes to your core interest. We did ask our viewers the one question they wanted to ask you. You'll not be surprised that most came back with, why isn't the £350 million, which we're getting back, why is it not in the manifesto? Why is it not in the manifesto?
It is, actually.
It's not there.
And
no,
Theresa May,
she said it
she said it at the launch of our manifesto.
She didn't.
She said the only way to take back control. She said we're going to take back.
You were there loyally clapping.
I was absolutely, absolutely. I was.
Supine way. You weren't allowed to speak. Were you? Or give it to you? Do you like the way that you're all being bossed around?
Well, just a couple of points.
Worshipping at the.
Yes, is the answer. I'll tell you why.
Go on.
I'll tell you why.
Because at the altar of St. Teresa. Why?
I'll tell you why. Because the contrast, but anything we can do to intensify the fundamental contrast of this election, which is between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. That's the choice before the people of this country. Do they really want Jeremy Corbyn in those negotiations?
Unfortunately,
I'll tell you something, I don't. I really don't.
Lovely to see you, Boris. Thanks so much for coming in. And let's see what my distinguished guests, Jess and Nicholas, made of that. Can I just pick up, though, on that point we were talking about, which is the tenor of the manifesto? I mean, I've certainly never read a Tory manifesto like it. No new tax cuts being offered, lots of new burdens for business.
But Robert,
I just want to be clear, you are wholly comfortable with what many people see as a very lefty form of
well, look, the world is a totally different world to the one in which I first came into politics 34 years ago, in Margaret Thatcher's first parliament. It's a totally different world.
Thank God.
But it is a different world, and it requires different responses, and it requires different solutions to very major problems, and the problems are very different now. So I think it's a really serious, high-minded, genuine attempt to try and drag the debate into dealing with the big issues. And these next 5 years are absolutely critical for Brexit, for the economy, for any number of issues, particularly social care.
I mean, Jess, I was very struck. I actually said this to Theresa May when I interviewed her last week, that so much of what was in that manifesto could have been said by Tony Blair.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely been a bit of robbing of Labour manifestos of old, like the energy crisis, which they all said was Marxist.
But how much does that worry you? Because there is a threat to Labour that lots of your core voters, particularly in the north, particularly on this Brexit issue, where I think quite a lot, as you know, particularly working-class Labour voters, are more in sympathy with the Tory position than with Jeremy Corbyn's position. You know, she's absolutely going for your core vote, isn't she?
Except that I don't think that it's it's too little too late. I don't think people where I live who are paying the bedroom tax and who are having their disability benefits taken away are suddenly going to go, oh, look, she said she was going to take the houses off old people. Look, what a lovely woman. That is just not going to happen. She presents incredibly inhumanely, just personally. I mean, no wonder, you know, she says Boris on your nice, colourful show, because she's not very warm, and I don't think that people think that she is going to be there for them and their families where I live. It's certainly not coming across on the doorstep. But there is a definite shift of what the Tories are saying. But they say a lot of things. They said they were going to sort out mental health. I haven't seen it. I certainly haven't seen it.
That is a long-term problem, Jess. You know, you agree with that. They have put a lot of money into
absolutely.
it. And it's the same with me. It hasn't come through properly yet, but it will come through. But the other point, Robert, is that the Tory party has always prospered because it's always retained this extraordinary ability to change. But it's built on very solid, very firm architecture and footings, and I'm completely content with the manifesto.
Jess Nicholas, we're going to talk to you more in just a few moments. Now, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the leader of the Greens, Caroline Lucas, who I think has been slightly better behaved than Boris Johnson. I don't think you have been ruffling through my aid memoir over here. Anyway, great to see you.
Thank you.
I really wanted to start with this issue. You don't call it the Progressive Alliance, do you? But I think, for some reason or other, you don't like the word progressive. But
no, it's not that. It's more we want it to be plural. It's
right.
not one big alliance. It's about local parties coming together in a handful of constituencies where there might be a possibility of some agreement about standing one candidate against a Tory in order to ensure we get as many MPs going back to the next Parliament who will fight for electoral reform and basically try to hold back what looks otherwise like a very large Tory landslide.
But, I mean, some Greens say to me that they're worried that you are, in a sense, self-harming because you are giving up the opportunity to fight in many, many more seats. So I think you've already stood down in about 60 seats.
It's not that many, but...
Well, how many is it?
I think it's about 30.
All right, but even so, the Lib Dems have given away in, what, 2?
Yeah.
So it looks very unfair.
It does look very unfair, and I can assure you that we're very frustrated about it. Because up and down the country, when I've been speaking about this, there is huge grassroots interest and enthusiasm for it from all parties, Labour, Lib Dems and Greens, and indeed people from no parties. So they want progressive parties, parties of the left and the centre-left, to get their act together. Otherwise, on June the 9th, we know how this story ends, because the electoral system that we have will give even more seats to the Tories. They will end up with this landslide if we're not very, very careful. And we need as strong and as robust an opposition as we can get, and that's what this was about. But do you know what? Nominations have closed now, so now we are focused on what the Greens stand for, and what I would love to talk to you today about, which I hope we can come to, is the environment, the missing issue of the general election campaign.
We'll certainly come to that in a minute, but before we get on to that, you've obviously had a chance, I assume, to read Labour's manifesto. Is there anything in there that you fundamentally disagree with?
There's lots that I disagree with. Let me say, first of all, that there's lots that I recognise from the 2015 Green Party general election. So there's a lot that makes you excited. There's a lot that makes me excited. But if I can point to some things that make me less excited, first of all, on Brexit, I think Labour have got this wrong. I think that basically they have not only given a blank cheque to the Tories on a hard Brexit, they have helped them go to the bank and cash it in.
But can I just ask you on that, though, Caroline? I mean, when I talk to voters, quite a lot of people who voted Remain are just fed up with the number of votes they're having. And, you know, I know you care passionately that people should be given a second chance to, you know, vote to stay in. But actually, that's not what I'm hearing from people.
It's not a second chance in the sense of saying, let's rerun the 23rd of June. It's saying this decision is going to be the most important of our generation. At the moment, under pressure, the Prime Minister has conceded that it will be Parliament that will sign this off after 18 months, 2 years' time. We're simply saying that we think it should go back to the British people. If you were getting a phone contract, you would have more chances to look at the small print and take something back that you don't like than you can with this. And
let's move on to the environment, because I know that one of the things I think you're going to be offering is in your manifesto is what you'd like to see, I think, is an Environmental Protection Act. Is that what you're calling it?
Yes.
And this would enshrine, I think, in British law all the environmental measures that we currently benefit, in your terms, from in respect of membership of the EU. But isn't it sort of pointless in the sense that the current government, if it's re-elected, would enshrine all those protections in this Great Repeal Act. So you'd just be doubling up on that, wouldn't you?
If only that were the case. I mean, first of all, the Environment Secretary, Andrea Leadsom, has said very clearly that she thinks only about 2/3 of that environmental legislation can be brought across, so she's not planning to bring all of it across. Secondly, the crucial thing is that currently the government isn't having any idea about how they would enforce that legislation. There's no point having a whole set of zombie legislation that you can't enforce because you don't have the European Commission, you don't have the European Court of Justice. So what we're saying is there needs to be a whole legal architecture around that to make sure that we can enforce legislation to clean up our air, that we can enforce legislation to make sure our beaches remain clean. And one other thing on that, I was so shocked, frankly, that air pollution hardly even made a sentence in the Tory manifesto. We have an air pollution emergency, 40,000 people dying early as a result linked to associations of air pollution. It's costing our economy £20 billion. I was surprised that Boris sat here and didn't mention that in his manifesto.
It's certainly something that is on my mind to raise next time we see a relevant Tory spokesman. No, I think it's a really important issue. I agree with you. So, look, don't go away, because after the break, we've got the prominent Labour frontbencher, Barry Gardiner. I'm delighted to be joined by Barry Gardiner from Labour's front bench, sent out to put the great Corbyn position to the world.
No, the Labour position to the world.
So while we're talking about the Labour position to the world, this manifesto, which you brought with you as an aide-memoire, it's been described as the most left-wing Labour manifesto since '83. But the thing which struck me is that the biggest commitment you're making is to abolish student fees. That will reward lots and lots of, frankly, quite well-off middle-class parents and their offspring. And at the same time, you're not ending the benefits freeze, which is, almost all serious analysts say, squeezing the living standards of the poorest more than anything else that this government has done. So, actually, this is a manifesto, a programme for the middle classes.
Well, let me take the 3 points that you've made. The first is that, yes, it's a manifesto that's also been described as the most popular set of policies that the Labour Party has come up with at a general election time for many years.
Well, we'll know that on June the 8th, but let's just go to the substantive points.
Then let's go to the issue of not school fees, student fees.
Student fees, yeah.
I think that...
With resources scarce, why £11 billion a year for something which, of course, it will be a benefit to poorer students, but a massive benefit for richer ones too?
You will know, Robert, that this year and last year we've seen the number of students applying from lower-waged families has actually gone down. And one of the things that we said right at the beginning when we introduced student fees was that we would monitor it so that we saw that it wasn't actually beginning to put people off. We've now seen that it is putting people off. And more than that, young people are now coming out because the coalition government tripled the fees. We're now seeing people coming out of university with £44,000 worth of debt on average each. They then come together and perhaps want to set up a home, start a family, and they find they can't do it. They're burdened with debt, they have low wages, and they feel that they're looking at the education that they...
Politics is about choices.
No,
it is about choices. And some of that money, many people would say, would have been better spent committing to end the benefits freeze, or indeed putting more money into the health service. Let's be clear on the health service. You are not planning to spend more than the Tories, the IFS, for example, calculate.
That was your third point, and I will come to it.
Please.
But you also asked me why we were doing this.
Yeah.
And the reason that we're doing this is because young people look at what they've been asked to do. They say, I've done it. I studied hard, I got my A-levels, I went to university, I did everything that I was told to do, and I was told that that was the way to have a real stake in this society. And they come out, and at the end of it, they look round, and they've got 0 hours jobs, they've got low wages. They look and they say, I can't even afford to scrape together enough for a deposit on rented accommodation. And yet I've come out with a degree. And they feel it's unfair.
Sure.
And what the Labour Party is
we haven't got a lot of time. So let's get on to this issue of choices. Why not more money for the NHS? Why not end the benefits freeze?
Well, look, if you're talking about more money for the NHS, let's be absolutely clear. Including the 10 billion of capital, we are putting 37 billion pounds into the NHS over the next Parliament. Compare that with the Conservatives, who are putting 8 billion pounds over the lifetime of the Parliament.
Well, actually, no. 8 billion is current spending. 8 billion of additional. No. It is additional. That does not include their capital spending.
No,
right? I spoke to the Institute of Fiscal Studies about this, and they say there is not a cigarette paper between what you're promising and what the Tories are promising.
Well, no,
that's what they say.
Well, it's not. It's certainly not what I think you would accept, which is that we are putting much more money into the NHS every year over what the Conservatives are over the lifetime of this Parliament. And we've said where we're getting the money from, and they have not.
Come on, let's get back to the benefits,
Let's get back to the benefits,
please.
OK, look, what we've done in terms of benefits is we've been very clear about benefits. We've said what we're keeping. We've said that we're keeping the winter fuel allowance, we're keeping the bus pass, sure. We are going to keep the triple lock, because we believe that elderly people are entitled to security and dignity in old age. Over and above all of those things, what we've then said is, look, we are going to have 10 billion pounds, that's 2 billion pounds a year, and we're going to address the benefits freeze, and we're going to then...
No, that money is allocated. I've read your manifesto, and it does not address the benefits freeze, Barry. It certainly doesn't.
I'm sorry?
Honestly, I've read it in detail. It says you will look at one aspect of universal credit. It does not say... I had a conversation with Jeremy Corbyn about this. You know, you are not addressing the benefits freeze in there. It is a big difference between universal credit and the benefits freeze, and you are not addressing it.
The 10 billion pounds is going to be allocated after we have done a review of benefits, and that...
Not what it says.
Sorry, well, but you asked me the question. It's after we do a review of the benefits...
You're changing the manifesto on air. Is that what you're doing?
No, I'm not.
Actually, that's not what it says.
Sorry, you know very well that, Jeremy, you asked the question at the launch. You asked this precise question at the launch. Jeremy said that, of course, we want to address the benefits freeze. The way that we are doing that is through the review that we are having when we come into government, the review that we have, and there's 10 billion pounds there, which has not been fully allocated, which will be distributed after we've had that review.
Barry Gardiner, we'll talk more about this in the days and weeks ahead, I'm sure. Thanks so much for joining me. And now let's have a chat with Jess and Nicholas about what we've just heard. So can I just ask you, Jess, about this issue of priorities? Is the Labour front bench's Jeremy Corbyn right to make his biggest commitment the abolition of student fees, in your view? Given you know, that many would say, you know, there is more money going into schools, there is more money going into the health service, but should they have, for example, ended the benefits freeze?
It wouldn't have been my priority.
What's that, student fees?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been my priority. However, I don't think it is a bad thing to have as your priority. And this idea that it's a really middle-class thing, the idea of education for all is something that most people really like. And obviously, I'm spending an awful lot of time with a lot of students at the moment, because there's literally hundreds of them out campaigning with me. And I was a bit like, oh, is it the right way to go? And they genuinely feel like they are the sort of forgotten generation. When I left university, under a Labour government, I had every chance of buying a house, and I bought a house when I was 22. There is literally no chance for these people. They feel like they are sort of lost in a world with £40,000 worth of debt, and that they can't then become just ordinary working families.
So a couple of other points. I mean, lots of your colleagues have said to me that when they bang on Labour doors, people say they'd vote for you if it weren't for Jeremy Corbyn. Is any of that changing?
No, that does definitely still happen. It's happening more at the moment because our opponents are obviously pushing it. I mean, my opponent is a Liberal Democrat, and they seem to be a busted flush to me.
But Jeremy Corbyn, in your constituency, is still a negative for you.
Only when they have it really put. I think that the general media sort of onslaught over Jeremy Corbyn over the past year or so had.
Is it the fault of the media? Or is it the fault
no. I don't think it's the fault of the media. I think that he made some terrible, unforced errors, and the media picks up on it, and the media also gives him a hard time. They both exist.
Can I just ask you one final thing? Keir Starmer said, actually in The Guardian the other day, that for him what really matters is that you win more seats. Now, the noise is coming out of Jeremy Corbyn's group is that what matters is that the vote share is better than last time. What for you counts as a success or failure in the general election?
An increased vote share is about as good as a chocolate fireguard.
So Keir's right that it's a failure unless you pick up more seats than last time.
I can't help the people I am desperate to help. I cannot do the things I am desperate to do just because I stacked up a load of votes in Islington North.
OK. Well, that's pretty clear. Thank you so much, Jess. Don't go away, because after the break, we'll have the actor Hugh Grant, and he'll tell us what he thinks of Theresa May's decision not to do a second probe into the conduct of the press. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. I'm delighted to be joined by the movie star and campaigner for the press to be more regulated, Hugh Grant. Hugh, you're here representing Hacked Off, and you are particularly hacked off because the Prime Minister, the latest Tory manifesto, ended the government's commitment to have a second Leveson inquiry. But we've had there's been so much of an investigation into the behaviour of the press. Why do we need yet another one?
Well, it was always a two-part inquiry. The first part dealt with the culture and practices of the press, and, as you know, very moderate proposals were recommended by Leveson and then voted for by a cross-party agreement in Parliament into law, and are now being shelved by...
But the press is behaving better than it was, surely.
There is absolutely no evidence of that. I mean, I can give you examples. The worst examples you have, there was a woman in Ireland last year who lost her mother, her sister, and 2 children in a car accident when it slipped into the sea. And at the funeral, the Mail sent a journalist lady posing as a mourner, bringing 2 children to pretend, I'm another mother, and to befriend this grieving woman. And that was then printed as an exclusive interview in the Mail. So there's that sort of thing.
But we have a regulator, IPSO, which is surely behaving, is surely showing teeth in the way that the previous regulator... I mean, look, the previous regulator was an absolute joke.
Yeah, and polls show that the public regard this replacement of the PCC, IPSO, as less trustworthy than the PCC. This new one, branded IPSO, arrived with a great fanfare saying we're going to have £1 million fines, we're going to have front-page apologies. There's actually been no fines of any amount of money at all since it came into existence. There's been no front-page apologies and not one single investigation. So I think it is a unique regulator, and it hasn't actually done any regulating at all.
But the other regulator, sort of funded by a wealthy individual, a controversial individual, Max Mosley, I mean, is that the way to go? That's the one that's authorised.
It doesn't... There is a regulator funded by a charity that he set up in memory of his son, who committed suicide in the wake of the lies written about Max Mosley in the News of the World, the lies that he was involved in a Nazi-themed orgy, which he sued for libel over and won. So he set up a fund in his son's name, and that has contributed to the setting up of one particular regulator called Impress, which is recognised, but it's not the one that newspapers are encouraged to join. It's a good regulator, they could join, but they could equally set up their own regulator, so long as it goes along with the very moderate terms of the recognition body.
Now, you know what people will say about your intervention, that this is just celebrity whinging and you benefited perfectly well from publicity and, it's all about you.
Well, I have 2 things, I think, to say about that. One is... 3 things, perhaps. One is, it really doesn't do me any good to take the tabloid press on full frontal for 6 years. It's the reverse of that, I can assure you. Secondly, with the exception of Steve Coogan, who comes and goes with Hacked Off, I think I'm the only so-called celebrity, a word I abhor, who's involved in the whole thing. Our key supporters are people like Sheila Hollins, whose daughter, Abigail Witchells, was stabbed by a madman, left in a quadriplegic state in hospital, and medical records stolen and printed in the News of the World. It's people like the Watson family in Glasgow, whose daughter was murdered in the playground, and their son then committed suicide because the newspapers said she deserved to be murdered. It's people like that. I mean, that Watson family on the radio a few years ago saying, "Thank God for Hacked Off." That's what keeps me going.
You want newspapers, in your view, to behave more responsibly. You've engaged in the great political debate we're all involved in. You call the Prime Minister a demented little Rotarian.
Yeah.
But doesn't that demean the quality of debate, that sort of personal insight?
Well, I feel unbelievable anger on behalf of these people that I've worked with over the last 6 years and who relived the suffering that they went through. They've been through big tragedies.
I mean, it just sounds so snobbish, a demented little Rotarian.
They were given personal promises by the last Tory Prime Minister, both in Parliament and to their faces, that Leveson would be seen through, that they would be protected, whatever the outcome of it, they would be the ones who were important. And now this Prime Minister, for short-term political gain, i.e. sucking up to the Daily Mail and Rupert Murdoch to get herself good headlines, to get herself elected, and in fact probably to get herself the leadership of the Conservative Party, throws it all away. It's an act of quite extraordinary
what are you looking
treachery.
for?
A letter from Christopher Jeffries. Do you remember Christopher Jeffries?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And I've seen that letter, and it is... You know, it's a powerful letter. Look, very lovely to have you on the show. I'm going to go off and say a little prayer that Middlesbrough play well today. Blooming heck, that was another action-packed show. My thanks to Bozza, Bazza, Caroline, Jess, Nick and Hugh. Today is, of course, the last day of the campaign that probably matters most to most people, the Premier League. See you next week.